As Jesus stood in front of a large crowd, he felt love and kindness toward them. They were like sheep without a shepherd, lost and alone. Long ago, God had promised to rescue them from the curse of sin and free them from the abuse and neglect of false shepherds.
Most assuredly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Yet they will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this illustration, but they did not understand the things which he spoke to them. Then Jesus said to them again, Most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life, and that they may have it more abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and am known by my own. Amen.
Good evening. I promised this morning that I'd tell you a little bit more about the work in India and how COVID has affected the work. I'm sure that we've all found ourselves grumbling, moaning, complaining over the past 2 years. But I want to help you get a bit of perspective. So we left India and literally an hour before COVID restrictions came in. It was outside of China, one of the hardest lockdowns in the world. You've got to think that you're living in a mud hut with no running water. You might have to walk 2 or 3 kilometres to get your water every day, but you're told you need to wash your hands every 20 minutes. You have to make the choice. Do you buy hand sanitizer or do you buy food today? Because the average wage where we work is about £1.50 a day. You're allowed out of your house in your village one day for one trip a week, but you've got no fridge in your house to keep your food fresh. You are a day labourer, but there's now no jobs. And a day labourer means you literally earn enough today to buy today's food. So what happens when you can't work? Because of COVID restrictions. You're a pastor of a church, and most churches in India and Nepal are independent churches. So you're banned from the church meeting together. And your church members can't work. And most Sunday services, there's not just a monetary offering, but people can't literally afford to give money, but they can afford to give a tithe of their food. And so the pastor and his family live on the food tithe that Sunday morning, but the churches aren't allowed to meet. So how does the pastor eat? I had emails from pastors saying, my children haven't eaten for 3 days. What do I say to my children as they're crying, going to sleep, that they're so hungry? Anyone suffer like that through COVID? No. Helps put things in perspective, doesn't it? We wondered and felt guilty, to be honest. We're leaving India. Our visas were cancelled anyway, so we had to leave India. But we felt terrible. We felt like we were running away to a much easier situation. And we were like, well, Lord, we've got no control of this, but we feel terrible. We don't know what's going on. I shared this morning, Cumdare mission, the moment we got to Aberdare, can you do the preaching? Can you do the ministry online? So we thought, okay, well, Lord, that's part of you saying, we're here doing what you want us to do. But then churches all over Wales started contacting me saying, we're hearing terrible things about what's going into India. Can we help? And I said, well, yeah, I have an Indian bank account. So if you want to send me money or send money through our mission, UFM, send it, and we'll be able to send it out to pastors that we know are in desperate need. Up until now, we've been able to channel about £20,000 to pastors and groups of pastors, and the emails that we've got that have come back saying, I can never thank you, I can never thank the churches enough, because we wouldn't have been able to continue without these gifts. Even in government school, you've got to pay for the textbooks and everything else, and the government schools in our area are absolutely terrible. You're lucky to get 50 days teaching a year. So most children are sent to little tiny private schools, but you had to carry on paying the fees even though there's been no school, just so that when finally restrictions finish, your child will be able to go to school. So again, pastors have been able to get money from through us and to be able to keep their children in school. Any of your children suffer like that? No. Just helps put things in perspective, doesn't it? One of the just wonderful things is that in an awful lot of the villages where there's no church, they're very, very suspicious of Christians. And they think that Christians only care about converting people. Well, that is like number one on the list, isn't it? But Jesus didn't just help people so they would get saved. I mean, we've got the 10 lepers, haven't we? And he healed all 10 lepers. Did he know that only one would come back and worship him? Well, yes, he's God. Did that stop him helping the other 9? No. So it's number one priority, but it's not the only priority. And so through the hospital where we've been based, and through a friend who's ministering in Delhi in a very large slum church, we've been able to send funds out, and they have been feeding over 2,500 families every month when there have been lockdowns and people haven't been able. So there's been wonderful support, and there are now believers where there weren't ever believers before, because they couldn't understand why the Christians, who they were so suspicious of, would want to help them when even their own government wasn't giving them any help. And it's a Hindu fundamentalist government, and here's Hindus saying, well, even our Hindu government isn't helping, but it's the Christians, and even Christians overseas, who are helping. And that tells us about their God compared to our gods. So Jesus is building his church. Is Jesus sovereign? Is he in control of COVID? Yes, he is. And does he send even bad things to bring out good? Yes, he does. Remember the tsunami 20 odd years ago? That, it decimated Indonesia, it swept over the Andaman Islands, over Sri Lanka, and it hit South India. Well, there were villages in South India that would not let a Christian minister or an evangelist go into the village. They drove them out every time. And the Indian government at that time said, we're a developed country, we don't need help from anyone else. But they weren't able to give their own people help. Do you know, there are churches all down that coast where the tsunami hit in South India, because it was Christians who bought new fishing boats, helped people rebuild their houses, and gave them the aid when they needed it. Can Jesus bring good out of the bad that he sends? Yes, he can. He's sovereign, but as we saw this morning, he has compassion on the sheep without a shepherd. And then we're in Cumdare. God's got a sense of humour. I'm a posh boy. I grew up in a Georgian mansion. I learnt to drive in my father's Porsche. My dad had 2 aeroplanes. And I'm in Cumdare Mission, where we have the hill coming up in Cumdare. And there's the posh red brick houses on that side of the village, where all the people have got 2 or 3 cars, and it looks like they've got life sorted and life together. And then behind the mission, there's the council estate, which is one of those, put them on top of the mountain, out of sight, and forget about them council estates. We started youth group on beginning of September, and we've had between 14 and 25 children come, only 3 of them from Christian homes, and the poor folks in the mission just like, all these kids are mental. And I went, yeah, that's because I'm mental. And mental people attract mental people. And I'm saying that in a nice way, okay? You know, in Hindi, main pagal hoon. I'm crazy. And so they're like, oh. Now, the only problem is that they go, Merv, you know how to control these kids. When you're not there on a Monday evening, it is carnage. So pray on a Monday evening for the youth group. I started a discipleship group for some of the teenagers. There's 4 teenage girls in the church. And over the summer, 2 of them gave their lives to the Lord. And their lives have changed. One's from a Christian family, one's from a non-Christian family. Her dad is Mark Hazelwood, the Cardiff City footballer, television football pundit who ended up in prison because of a multi-million-pound fraud. And well, it's his stepdaughter who's been saved. And Mark Hazelwood has started coming to church occasionally. So pray for that family. And these 2 girls are just growing in the Lord wonderfully, and it's a tremendous encouragement because the mission hadn't seen conversions for years. I also hooked up with the South Wales Open Air Mission, going out preaching in the open air, because you might have guessed I have a voice designed for open air preaching. I don't normally need microphones and amplifiers. I think I swallowed one at birth. And so going out with the open air mission, we've seen people converted. Actually, no, there's an awful lot of demon possession because of people messing with the occult and witchcraft and everything. And virtually every time we've done an open air in Aberdare, we've had people come up to us and say, I think I'm demon possessed. And I've gone to other ministers and they don't know what to do. Would you know what to do? I said, look, I've been in India. I'm used to virtually every Sunday service, someone manifesting demon possession. And so we prayed for people. We had a lady who I prayed for on a Tuesday lunchtime, and that Tuesday evening she came to the prayer meeting for the whole church to pray for her. So you can pray for Share. And then Christmas time, I wrote a simple little tract to go out to the whole neighbourhood, inviting people to the services, called Peace at Christmas. And the whole thing is, well, we sing about peace at Christmas, and there's pop songs, and where's the peace at Christmas? We've got Russian forces on the Ukraine border. We've got wars in Eritrea, in Ethiopia. Your husband's going to come home late from the pub and the turkey is burnt. And there's huge arguments, and more divorces start on the 3rd of January than any other time in the year. It's called Divorce Day by the solicitors because that's the first day the solicitors are open after the Christmas holidays. Where's the peace at Christmas? We've had 3 people ring us up saying, I've received your Christmas tract. How can I know peace? One couple, I'll just give you their names, their initials, L and G. Her previous boyfriend beat her up and drunk, rolled her into the River Taff a few years ago and tried to drown her. And it was only because an army officer was walking past and dived in and rescued her. She's an alcoholic, she's bipolar, life about as low as a human being could go. She came to church 3 Sundays ago, absolutely drunk out of her head, was wandering around in front of the pulpit, and the pulpit's about as high as I am, trying to show me her tattoos on bits of the body that I didn't want to see. and she's drunk. And my wife wasn't well, so she was watching on Facebook live and just could hear what I was saying but not see what's going on. And I'm saying, please, will you sit down and just listen to what I'm saying? And her friend, who was drunk as well, was wandering around with her phone on speakerphone so we could all hear the conversation in the middle of the service. Well, she rang me up 2 weeks ago and said, could you come and see me? So I went to see her. Her present boyfriend is a recovering heroin addict. His veins got so infected and literally burst, and he had to have an 8-pint blood transfusion. His grown-up daughters and granddaughter are totally estranged from him and don't want to have anything to do with him. They were in church last Sunday night. They're not saved, but they're coming and hearing the gospel. And I've been going to their house and doing a very simple Bible study with them the last 2 weeks. And then there's Dee, who again received a tract, rang us up, and her first words were, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I don't have any faith at all, but I'm so depressed I haven't been able to basically get out of bed for 2 years, and I'm a mental health nurse. So she said, could you and your wife come and see us? So Kim and I went up to see her just a couple of days before Christmas, and terrible background of an abusive relationship and a partner beating her up so she then couldn't have children. She was so badly damaged. And then her dad died 2 years ago. And then her dog was poisoned a few months ago. And she's just in a horrendous depression and hasn't been out of work for 2 years. And there's a statue of an angel on top of the box of her dog's ashes, and she said, and that's not giving me any peace. And so we just chatted, and I prayed for her. I gave her a New Testament and said, look, read these passages, but folded some pages down. Just read these passages. Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and only he can give you peace. And he says, he promises that he will give you his peace, which is not like the peace of the world that depends on circumstances and whether you're a success or not. And he gives you his peace. So God is at work. We just long that the church that would be filled with the people that Jesus wants to fill it with. Yeah. And can he use me? Well, look at this morning. He can use our weakness, and boy am I weak. He can use all our faults and foibles, and boy have I got a lot of foibles and faults. But he uses just ordinary people like us. And so please do pray. So we're regarded now as home missionaries, because we're in a mission church, and we need to be missionaries to our neighbourhood. But we're still doing Zoom ministry to India and Nepal all the time. Another little snapshot, a pastor that I've not met in the flesh, but a friend of his had met me in India, and he WhatsApped me and he said, could you do some ministry to my group of pastors? It's an AOG grouping. So I said, yeah, fine, if you're willing to have a Baptist boy minister to AOG pastors, Pentecostal partners. And so I did some training for these pastors, and then they said, we have a family devotions on Zoom for all our families. Would you be prepared to do some ministry on that? So I said, yeah, fine. So one Thursday night, I'm doing a simple Bible study with all these families gathered around one smartphone in their mud hut. But there's 4 guys who are in COVID wards listening to me preach on Zoom. That's a Thursday night. By Saturday morning, 2 of them are dead. So I thought I was giving them a ministry to encourage them through COVID. Little did I realise I was preparing some of God's saints for going to heaven within a couple of days. Now, if I was in India, a lot of that wouldn't happen. But because we've been back in Wales, I've been able to do way, way more. So, yeah. God doesn't lead us always in the way we want to go. But when we're willing to be led in the way that he wants us to go, lots of things happen. So, that's enough for me. I'm boring. Jesus is much more exciting. So we're going to very, very quickly look at Ezekiel chapter 34, which is the Old Testament passage on Jesus being the good shepherd. And And you can only fully understand John 10 when you understand the background is here in Ezekiel chapter 34. Basically, when Jesus in John 10 says, I am the good shepherd, if you're a Jew and you know your Old Testament, you know what he's talking about from Ezekiel chapter 34. But the first thing Jesus does here in the Old Testament is confront the false shepherds in the church. And you don't have to have been a Christian for very long before you come up against false teachers and false teaching in the church. There are some people in the church, they might preach theologically sound truth, but they do it because they love preaching and they love the position and they love the adoration of the sheep, but they don't like serving sheep. There's political leaders like that, aren't they? Hey, they'll give you restrictions and then blow. Do they have to keep the restrictions? No, they'll go up for their eye test, even if it's 300 miles and they've passed how many dozen Specsavers, we don't know. Or they'll, get number 10 redecorated at the cost of several £100,000. Where did that money come from? You see, they're shepherds who like fleecing the sheep. And we see it in the world. We see people who are in leadership not to lead, to help the sheep under them, but they're in leadership because of the prestige and the power and the money and the fame that it gives them. And sadly, what you see in the world creeps into the church. So you'll get emails and you can go on the internet and you can hear sermons. Well, you see, my time is so precious. And I'm God's man doing God's ministry, and I really need a new Learjet, because so I don't have to queue in airports, and I can just and anyway, have you seen people in airplanes? They're like demons. So I need to be on an airplane that I can get to where I need to go to do the ministry God's called me to do. So please, will you send in your donations for $34 million? Because I need it. And by the way, I'm not a preacher, I'm a life coach. Or we were doing a conference and there was this young Indian pastor's wife working for a Christian charity, and she's been in the teaching during the day, and we're going through Timothy on living a sacrificial life as a leader in the church. And Kim's doing Bible study on fruit of the Spirit with these ladies, and Kim says to me, after the Bible study she's done, please come and talk to this lady. So I go and talk to her. She's very well educated. And what's the woman's name? Joyce Meyer. Yeah. Joyce Meyer. She says, I send the equivalent in our money of about £100 a month to support Joyce Mayer's ministries because she's a wonderful, godly woman. I said, okay, well, stop. I said, tell me the last sermon you heard Joyce Meyer preaching. She says, I can tell you, I listened to it last night. There was Joyce Meyer in a Varanasi silk sari, and she had a gold and ruby necklace on with matching gold and ruby earrings on, and she was preaching from the Old Testament on the tabernacle. She said, well, the tabernacle was covered in gold. And you're a temple of the Holy Spirit, so you deserve to be covered in gold. And the priest, the chief priest, well, he had 12 precious jewels on the ephod over his chest. And we're a priesthood of all believers. Therefore, we deserve to be adorned in precious jewels. Joyce Meyer, you can check it on her website, was the first evangelist to go to Vietnam and to be given a visa to do a big crusade in an auditorium in Vietnam. I got a friend who's a missionary in Vietnam. He went to check it out. Her visa was revoked the day before. She never got to preach in the auditorium, but go on the website, according to her and her organization, she preached in the auditorium and thousands of people put their hands up and gave their lives to the Lord. She never even went in there. But there's great big boxes for you to tick to support her ministry and send in all your money. It's nothing new. Ezekiel 34 is warning God's sheep and warning the false shepherds that God sees it all and he will judge the false shepherds. Because as a Christian, you can be damaged by the false shepherds. You can be hurt by the false shepherds, and it makes you angry and cry out, God, aren't you seeing what's going on to your church? Don't you care about what these men and women are doing to your church? When are you going to do something about it? Well, here's God's answer. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, woe to the shepherds. Warning. I used to love Lost in Space when I was a little boy, and there was Robbie the robot. Warning, warning, warning. Well, here's God's word to the false teachers. Warning. And if God warns you, you better well prick up your ears and listen, because that's a battle you can't win. Warning, woe to the shepherds of Israel who only look after themselves. Literally, who only shepherd themselves. Who their whole ministry is about the shepherd care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? So here's a whole group of leaders, and all they do is care about themselves. They don't care about God's sheep. Survey was done by Christianity Today in America of prosperity gospel churches and normal gospel preaching churches, and they did a spot check. Does the prosperity gospel work? Because if it works, well, you should get richer. They checked the car park of the pastor's car park in the prosperity churches against the car park of the members' cars in these prosperity churches. It works. On average, the pastor's cars were worth 4 times more than the members' cars. That tells you who the prosperity gospel works for. The same week, they did a survey of normal gospel preaching churches' car parks. On average, the pastor's cars were worth less than the average value of the members' cars. That tells you who the pastors care about. And that's just the cars. Shouldn't you take care of the flock? You, the shepherds, eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, slaughter the choice animals, but you do not care for the flock. Literally, you don't shepherd the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. That's pastoral care. That's what you're meant to do. That's what a pastor's meant to do, a shepherd's meant to do. He's meant to pastor the weak, the injured, the disabled sheep. Because that's what we all are, even pastors. We're sheep. We're weak. We're sinners. We've got all sorts of messes in our lives. We all need shepherding. But you haven't brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no real shepherd. How many Christians have you met because they don't go to church any longer because they had a bad experience of a bad shepherd? How many have you met? Lots. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. This is what is terrible about false teachers. It scatters Christians and they become prey to everything and anything else. They literally become meat. That's what the word is for prey. They become meat. But these are God's sheep. My sheep wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. Therefore, You shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered and has become food for all the wild animals, and because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but they shepherded themselves rather than my flock. Therefore, O shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says: I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. That's the opposite of Romans. If God is for us, who can be against us? But here God says to the false shepherds, I'm against you. And if God is against you, who can be for you? No one. I will remove them from tending the flock, literally from shepherding the flock, so that the shepherds can no longer shepherd themselves. God says, I will get rid of you. I hate preaching bad news in the Bible, don't you? I want to hear good news. Well, actually, that is good news, isn't it? That is good news. Get rid of the false teachers and the selfish preachers, the harsh creatures, the brutal shepherds. Oh, but then you've got the good shepherd. So here's the sovereign Lord speaking. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be meat for them. So who's going to come and save the sheep? Jesus. Does he say, I might? No. Does he say, possibly? No. This is a promise of God. I will rescue my sheep. Isn't that an encouragement? So, yep, there are false teachers, there are false shepherds, there are people decimating churches. Here's Jesus' promise. Don't worry about them as much as trusting me. I will rescue my sheep. That's what his name means, isn't it? You will give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. It's his name. It's his nature. He's the Saviour. He's the rescuer of his sheep. John 10, the hireling cares nothing about the sheep. When danger comes, they run away. But I'm the good shepherd. I lay down my life for the sheep. I don't make the sheep lay down their lives for me. I, the shepherd, lay down my life for the sheep. What a difference. What a difference. Verse 11, for this is what the sovereign Lord says. You didn't search for the lost. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them, or literally inquire after them. So when Jesus says, I did not come to call the healthy, I came to call the sick. I came to seek and to save the lost. He's referring to Ezekiel 34. Couldn't be clearer. When he's saying, I came to seek and to save the lost, he's saying, I'm the Lord, the sovereign Lord shepherd of Ezekiel 34. I come to search for my lost sheep. So what do? Do you worry about the false preachers and the false teaching destroying the churches? Or do you pray, Jesus, you've promised to search out and find your lost sheep. Will you do it? Do it in my day. Do it in my area. Even use me. But Jesus, it's got to be you seeking them and searching out for them. As a shepherd shepherds his scattered flock when he is with them, so will I look after, literally shepherd my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I will bring them out from the nations. It's not just talking about Israel, Israelite sheep who need saving. It's talking about the sheep of all the nations who need saving. I will bring them out of all of the nations, and I will bring them into their own land. I will shepherd them on the mountains of Israel, in the ravines and in all the settlements in the land. I will shepherd them in a good pasture, and on the mountain heights of Israel will be their grazing land. They will lie down in good grazing land, and there will be feed in a rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I myself will shepherd my sheep and make them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays, the backsliding sheep who've gone wandering off from the fold, the lost sheep who were never saved in the first place. I myself will go after them and rescue them. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured, and I will strengthen the weak. Oh, isn't that wonderful? What a shepherd you and I have, or if we don't have him, we could have. You might have come in here tonight not having a shepherd, being a broken, bruised, battered sheep, and you can cry out to Jesus and ask him to come into your life, and you can leave here tonight with the good shepherd who will lead you and guide you, who will heal you, who will mend your wounds, physical, emotional, and spiritual, and make you whole. That is his promise. And can he do it? Yeah, he can. He's way bigger than your problems. You're just a human. He's God. He's the creator and sustainer of the universe. Your problems are tiny. So of course he can. So yeah, his hands are powerful, but his hands are caring and gentle. And he says, I will bind up your wounds. I will heal you. I will feed you. But then sometimes, it's not the pastors, is it? Sometimes there are people in the church who think they're really strong Christians, and they throw their weight around. I've been in church meetings where I've actually heard people say, well, I've been a member 40 years, she's only been a member 1 year, my vote should count 40 times as much as hers. I actually heard that said in a church meeting. Well, I've got the right theology. Their theology, way suspect. You should only listen to me in the church meeting. Well, what does Jesus say to people who say they're Christians and who throw their weight around in the church, and they're the ones who've always got to be heard and not the quiet sheep? What does Jesus say about people like that? Verse 17. As for you, my flock, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will judge between one sheep and another, between rams and the goats. Is it not enough for you to feed on the good pasture? Must you trample the rest of the pasture with your feet? Is it not enough for you to drink clear water? Must you also muddy the water with your feet? Must my flock feed on what you've trampled and drink what you've muddied with your feet? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says to them. See, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep, because they shove with flank and shoulder, butting all the weak sheep with their horns until you've driven them away. That's not the leaders. That's the people in the church who love to have their voices heard. And if it's not their way, it's the wrong way. And if you don't listen to them and do what they want, then they butt you out of the way. And they muddy the waters. They start to criticize the sermon and say, well, you don't want to be listening to that. That's rubbish. And they steal from the sheep what Jesus intends for the sheep. Oh, what's Jesus going to do? Well, listen again, verse 22. I will save my flock. He doesn't just save us from the false shepherds, he saves us from the false Christians, the ones who love to throw their weight around and butt what they think are the weak sheep out of the way. He says, I will save my flock, and they will no longer be plundered. I will judge between one sheep and another. I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will tend them. He will tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. Well, who's that then? Who's the son of David? Who's the good shepherd? It's Jesus. Okay? Well, when's he going to do it? That's the big question, isn't it? When are all the false shepherds going to be sorted? When are all the false sheep going to be sorted? I will make a covenant of peace with them and rid the land of wild beasts, so that they may live in the desert and sleep in the forest in safety. That's not normal dwelling place for a sheep. That's where the predators are. And yet, he says, I'm going to bring in such peace that even what's not the naturally safe place for the sheep to dwell, it'll be safe. I will bless them and the places surrounding my hill or my mountain. I will send down showers in season, and there will be showers of blessing. The trees of the field will yield their fruit, and the ground will yield its crops. The people will be secure in the land. That's a reverse of the curse in Genesis chapter 3. By the toil, the sweat of your brow you will labor, and the ground will give up thorns and thistles. All that's going to be gone. They will know that I am the Lord when I break the bars of their yoke and rescue them from the hands of those who enslaved them. They will no longer be plundered by the nations, nor will wild animals devour them. They will live in safety, and no one will make them afraid. There will be no anxiousness, no fear, no tears, no death. So when's this going to happen? I will provide for them. Now, I'm using the NIV. It says, a land renowned for its crops. It literally says, I will provide for them a garden of renowned. What does that sound like? Yeah, that's Garden of Eden language. God's saying, I'm going to restore the whole world to how it was in the Garden of Eden. When there's no death, no sickness, no pain, no disease, no tears, no fear, nothing to plunder you or cause you harm or damage. I will provide for them a garden of renown, and they will no longer be victims of famine in the land, nor bear the scorn of the nations. Then they will know that I, the Lord their God, am with them. Oh, there's a Christmas verse for you. Emmanuel, God with us. Then they will know that I am Emmanuel, God with us, God the good shepherd. And that they, the house of Israel, are my people, declares the sovereign Lord. You, my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, are my people, and I am your God, declares the sovereign Lord. So when's this going to happen? Well, this is the bit of bad news, isn't it? Not until Jesus comes again. So when are the false shepherds going to be judged and removed? When Jesus comes again. When are the false sheep going to be judged and removed? Not until Jesus comes again. So there's the reality test for me and you. So where have we got to keep our eyes focused? Who have we got to keep our eyes focused on? Jesus, the Good Shepherd, who says, I will rescue you, not just from the false shepherds, but from the false sheep. And I will, whatever wounds they've caused you, I will bind up those wounds. I will heal those wounds. Whatever famine they've caused in your soul, I will feed you and I will fill you. And when you go wandering, because that's what sheep do, I will myself will search for you and inquire after you. And it's the idea of inquiring not just of where you are, but after your well-being. That's how concerned the shepherd is of the sheep. You and I have a wonderful shepherd. And he says, I will rescue, and I will go on rescuing until the day I come again to bring in the grand performance of my rescue. When everything that is evil and bad that oppresses you and wants to devour you, I'll judge them all and I'll get rid of them all. And then you will dwell in my garden of renown. But it won't be Adam and Eve. It'll be the whole church. God with us. God the Good Shepherd. And we will just be there praising and worshipping and adoring. What amazing God and Saviour we have. So keep your eyes on him. Keep your ears on him, because he says, my sheep hear my voice and they follow me. And boy, is he worth listening to and following, because he will never, ever let us down. We'll let him down. He will never lead us astray. He's the one who comes and finds the strays. He'll never lead us astray. He will lead us to the good pastures and all the way to heaven.